Soon enough, Darcy's passion soared for this beautiful woman whose very essence spoke to him in a language he had never before heard. He adored her. Oh, to spend the rest of his life communicating only with her in such a fashion. This feels so perfect, so natural, so right. Let us fall in love, he wanted to say. How could he when they really did not know each other? Whether he was bewitched or suffering the most vivid dream in his lifetime, he needed to be certain beyond a shadow of doubt of what they were sharing. "Tell me this is not a dream," he whispered, kissing her on her forehead.
"I assure you it is not."
"You likely have surmised that I am Fitzwilliam Darcy, Bingley's friend. When next we meet, you must find a way to call me William. Then, and only then, I shall know. Tonight was not merely a dream, but rather the best night of my life."
"The best night, sir?" Elizabeth asked.
Darcy assured her that indeed it was. "The two of us are so very much alike," he later said. "We both value family above all else, and as a consequence, we likely would do anything for them. As it pertains to your current circumstances, no one who truly knows you would judge you harshly for marrying a man whom you do not love for the sake of your family. I say this not to advise you on how you ought to act in light of your recent discovery. I only mean to say that honourable men and women of all stations in life marry out of obligation every day."
"Honourable, you say? So you think you know me, Mr. Darcy?"
"Yes, I think I know you very well, Mrs. Tillman."
"Pray, sir, in light of all that has unfolded between us, I would have you call me anything but that."
"What precisely shall I call you?"
"What else would you like to call me?" she asked, her spirits rising to playfulness. How good it felt to be able to show this side of her, if only for one night.
"I think I would like to call you my love," he replied.
His eyes said even more. She could feel her heartbeat speeding its pace. "My love? Sir, I must object to such an appellation. You cannot possibly love me. Our acquaintance is far too short a duration to warrant the sentiment."
"On the contrary, my love, I feel as though I have known you all my life. I have loved you from the moment I first laid eyes on you. Surely you believe in destiny?"
She shook her head. "I cannot say that I do."
"Destiny is when two people who are meant to be together find their way to each other against all odds."
"You and I made love tonight, sir, time and time again, but I fear that is a far cry from our having found our way to each other."
"Oh, Elizabeth, my love, the path is clear, and if you will but trust me, I will show you the way." The two lovers awakened at early dawn and prepared, albeit reluctantly, to part each other's company. "I suppose I ought to leave this room as well. Your sister will expect to find you here this morning, will she not?"
"No, I decided this room was more suitable, which is why the servant believed it was unoccupied. I usually occupy an apartment on the same corridor as the mistress's apartment when I spend the night here. Only last night I dared not chance my sister discovering me in such a wretched state, especially in the wake of her happy news."
"There, you see, it was destiny that drew you to this particular room last night," Darcy said.
She smiled in acknowledgement of the veracity of his declaration. "No doubt," she silently considered. "You must stay here, sir. The servant will surely inform Charles that he escorted you to this apartment. As for my own situation, there is no cause for concern. You see, I am very fond of early walks. No one will be surprised that I am up and about at this hour as opposed to being in my usual apartment."
Guiding her around to face him, he lifted her chin and kissed her lips. At length, he said, "Until we meet again, properly." After last night with Mr. Darcy.
Chapter 1. Elizabeth fought to keep her hands from trembling. Finally, the formidable formal introductions were over, and one of her greatest challenges was just beginning. She had to act as if she had never laid eyes on the gentleman who had held her so tenderly throughout the previous night, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. He was the man who had made her feel like a woman for the first time in her life, despite her being a widow, and despite her being on the heels of marrying another man. Mr. Darcy stood just over 6 feet tall. He was solidly built and wore an impeccably tailored suit. The way his eyes pored all over her and the gentle touch of his hands flooded Elizabeth's senses with memories of being with him. Last night was not a dream, the consequence of an excitable imagination. Instead, he is before me, the most beautiful man my eyes might ever wish to behold. Everyone else in the room fell away. It was only Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth in that moment together. The others in the breakfast room might just as well have been part of the décor, along with the ornate walls and curtains tied back with golden tassels, her brother-in-law, Charles Bingley, and his sister Caroline, and several uniformed footmen attending their posts. Instead, Elizabeth only saw Mr. Darcy standing before her, someone who possessed the power to throw all her carefully laid out plans for her future into utter and complete chaos.
For Mr. Darcy's part, Elizabeth's arrival proved a balm to all the anticipation he had suffered, hoping and waiting for her to appear in the room while doing his best to play the part of an attentive guest, one who listened and responded to his friend Charles Bingley at the right time, while deflecting his friend's sister Miss Bingley's persistent but unfruitful attempts to engage him in conversation. "She called me William," Darcy recalled thinking when Elizabeth approached him a few moments before. Never had the sound of a single word filled him with so much joy, so much pleasure, and most of all, so much hope, that the night they had shared was but the promise of so many more such nights to come. Doing everything in his power not to belie the notion of this being their first introduction, Darcy fought back the happiness that threatened to overtake his countenance. His busy mind, however, would not be so easily subdued. He was nervous, doing his best not to show it. He managed to keep a serious expression on his face. He had to remind himself that she was not his. Not yet. He had to remind himself that to everyone else in the room, he and Elizabeth were mere strangers who had never laid eyes on each other prior to that occasion. Confused by this battle between his emotions and his brain, Darcy forced himself to breathe. Elizabeth walked to the buffet, and he watched her every movement, unable to tear his eyes away from her. Once she had chosen everything she wanted, she turned and glanced around the table. Her dark, bewitching eyes landed on him, and she smiled softly. He smiled back at her. She began to walk toward him. His heart raced. Elizabeth's footsteps were slow and measured, but they eventually led her to him. He wondered how it was possible that he was so nervous, but he was sure it had something to do with this being the first time they were seeing each other since they had spent the best part of the night making love. Also, it was the first time they would be engaging each other in a crowded setting. Would it be obvious what had happened between them? Would it be evident that he had been with her in the way that a man was supposed to be with a woman? Darcy longed to be anywhere other than the breakfast room, as long as it was just the two of them. He wanted to embrace her and kiss her. He wanted to do even more than that. Elizabeth stood mere inches away from him. Darcy hoped his heartbeat was not so loud as he suspected. He rose from his seat, careful not to betray his calm composure, or rather lack thereof.
"Do you have any objections to my sitting beside you, Mr. Darcy?" she asked, placing her plate on the table.
Her voice was music to Darcy's ears. "It is my pleasure, I assure you," he began softly. "Your doing so must surely hasten my getting better acquainted with you." Elizabeth stumbled. Darcy caught her. He brought her against him and held her. Darcy was stunned by the feelings that came over him. He was fascinated by the glistening curve of her throat and by the rise and fall of her breast as she breathed. He heard himself make a soft noise, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Are you injured? Did you trip over your own feet?"
"Or rather something to that effect," Elizabeth replied.
Darcy stared hard at Elizabeth's lips. He wanted to hold her in his arms and kiss her until they were both breathless. Indeed, he wanted nothing more than to hold her and never let her go.
"There is no need for concern," Elizabeth continued, freeing herself from his hold on her. "I suppose I am a bit clumsy this morning. I have not yet had my morning tea," she said as she sat down.
"Your morning tea?" Darcy responded questioningly. He sat down in his chair.
"Indeed, I am never quite myself until I have had my morning tea. It makes me—"
Darcy held his breath as she paused. Elizabeth was teasing him. A loosened strand of her dark hair fell across her face. He ached to reach out and tuck it behind her ear. He fought the urge. Doing so would have been the most natural thing in the world to him hours earlier. Recalling how he had fastened her gown at the break of dawn, he almost groaned with the need to touch her. "What does it make you?" he asked. Heavens, he wanted to see her smile at him again. He had seen her tears. He had held her in his arms the night before and listened as she wept. Now, he simply wanted to hear her laugh.
"Well, sir, it makes me happy," she said. "I am always happiest when I have had my morning tea, and now that you know one of my secrets, you must tell me one of yours."
Darcy half smiled. "I am sure I have no such secrets to share, at least not in present company." She was sitting so close. She smelled like roses and sunlight and everything good in the world, and he wanted her so much.
"Spoken as only a gentleman would," Elizabeth said.
But she was still smiling and still close enough that he could have kissed her if their circumstances had allowed.
"You are a gentleman, are you not? Or have I misjudged your character?"
"Do you fancy yourself a good judge of character?" Darcy asked.
"I certainly like to think I am."
"I beg your pardon, but for the sake of argument, what if I am not a gentleman?" Elizabeth laughed again.
"Why, of course you are. How could you not be a gentleman? In my limited experience, I dare say you appear to be everything a gentleman ought to be."
His gaze lingered on her, allowing the time to let his eyes roam over her face, admiring the shape of her lips, her cheeks, and the curve of her neck. Inwardly he sighed. He was happy that Elizabeth felt comfortable enough to sit beside him and engage in such teasing banter. Still, he did not think it was wise for her to be so close to him. Realizing that he was staring at her, he quickly reached for the pot of steaming hot coffee and poured himself a cup, waving away the servant's offer of assistance. He became somewhat self-conscious. He knew very well that he was feeling this way because her eyes, her lips, and her skin held him captive in a way that he had never experienced with any other woman. "I trust you had a pleasant walk this morning," he said, seizing the initiative.
"Did I mention having walked this morning?"
"You did not have to. Your eyes gave you away."
"My eyes?"
"Indeed, your eyes, for what other explanation is there for their brightness at such an hour as this, if not the exertion of such an exercise?"
"How astute of you to notice."
"I hope you will afford me many such opportunities for such observations." If he had hoped for a positive response, he was not disappointed. Elizabeth's smile faltered for a moment before returning brighter than ever. She nodded.
"Yes, I shall."
Darcy smiled, and then he asked, "Will you do me another favour?"
"Anything," she said, blushing all the while.
The blush caused his heart to flutter wildly in his chest, and he was a bit breathless as he continued. "Then I would like to invite you to take a walk with me this afternoon."
"I would like that very much," she whispered.
"Do you have any fixed plans?" he asked. "If not, shall we say 3:00? Elizabeth nodded her head. "I look forward to it," he said.
"As do I."
Darcy was not sure how much longer he could last. His attraction to her was so strong, so intoxicating. Adoration and longing roared through him like a tidal wave. He wondered if she realized what he was feeling. He wondered if she could read his mind. Could Elizabeth tell that he was attracted to her in the way a man was supposed to be attracted to a woman? He wondered if she knew he wanted nothing more than to be with her, alone, for the rest of the day, and possibly for the rest of his life. Trying his best to remain calm and collected, he took a sip of his coffee and then a bite of fruit.
"Mr. Darcy seems quite taken with our Mrs. Tillman. Are you not, Mr. Darcy?" Miss Bingley opined, with particular emphasis on the title in Elizabeth's surname.
"I am fascinated," he remarked, leaving the young lady looking stupid.
The aggrieved young lady's ensuing words, spoken under her breath, were inaudible to Elizabeth's ears. However, Elizabeth had not been entirely oblivious to the young lady sitting at the table throughout breakfast. She watched out of the corner of her eye as a scowl formed on Miss Bingley's face. Obviously, the young woman was not happy about what she saw happening mere feet away. Elizabeth was not sure what to make of her peevish expression. Did she view Mr. Darcy as her own rightful property? Was she annoyed that he was shirking her attention and flirtations and engaging in conversation with the most unlikely prospect, a young woman he had just met and whose family had no wealth or influence to offer. Despite her attempts to appear reconciled, Caroline was outraged that her brother had married Jane Bennet. Elizabeth knew Caroline felt no fondness for anyone else in the Bennet family, but most of all, she despised Elizabeth. Miss Bingley was biting her bottom lip, sighing loudly and often, and looking to draw attention to herself. She definitely was having an uneasy moment, a very unladylike one at that. The last thing Elizabeth wanted was to give rise to Miss Bingley's jealousy, especially if such concerns genuinely called for such a sentiment. After all, what did she know about the gentleman seated next to her? He had given the slightest hints of an attachment, but heavens forbid said attachment involved Caroline Bingley. What a harrowing thought indeed, one which Elizabeth was not in the mood to entertain. She had promised herself that her night with Mr. Darcy was a one-time occurrence at best, and certainly not something she was likely to repeat any time soon at most. Elizabeth had resolved to marry Mr. William Collins, her duplicitous cousin and heir to her late father's estate, to save her family from losing Longbourn. She had no time for distractions. Turning her attention to her brother-in-law, Charles Bingley, Elizabeth asked, "How is my sister this morning?"
"Quite well, Elizabeth. She's looking well and feeling well too. She's happy as can be, as you can very well imagine the reason."
Elizabeth smiled knowingly, for Bingley was no doubt referring to his wife's being with child, the joyful news which Jane had shared with Elizabeth the day before, and unknowingly set the stage for Elizabeth's current predicament. "I am happy to hear that," said Elizabeth. "I look forward to seeing her before returning to Longbourn."
"I know it will delight her to see you," said Charles. "Pray, let me know when you plan to take your leave, and I shall call for a carriage."
"Thank you, Charles. However, that is entirely unnecessary. I much prefer to walk. After last night, I am in desperate want of the exertion." Despite her nocturnal activities, Elizabeth was bursting with energy, or maybe she was so energized because of them. All she knew was she was in no hurry to relinquish her memories from last night to the unpleasant reality of what awaited her at Longbourn, an excitable mother, 3 silly younger sisters, and her ridiculous intended.
"Yes, of course," said Charles, nodding his head.
Elizabeth dabbed her mouth with her napkin, placed it aside, and stood to take her leave. She had taken but a few paces before Mr. Darcy cleared his throat, setting his cup aside.
"Pardon me as well, Charles. I have matters to attend with my man, Waters, which will not wait." "Of course," replied Charles.
Miss Bingley stood just as Mr. Darcy did. She raced to him and tried blocking his path.
"Mr. Darcy," she said, interlacing her arm with his, "it is so long since I last saw you. We have not seen each other in months. I am hoping we might spend the morning getting reacquainted, just the 2 of us."
Elizabeth's gaze widened. She could not believe Miss Bingley's audacity.
"Miss Bingley," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the young lady most peculiarly, as though thoroughly displeased with what she'd said. He snatched his arm away from her touch as if he had felt a sharp sting shoot up it from her hand to his elbow, and wanted to get rid of the sensation as quickly as possible. He turned on his heels and strode out of the room, right past Elizabeth standing near the doorway, staring after him, utterly shocked at the scene that had just played out in front of her eyes.
Miss Bingley called out,
"Oh, Mr. Darcy, I just remembered that I have something of immense importance to discuss with you. Let us take a turn around the garden so we may talk."
Mr. Darcy did not slow his pace. He kept walking.
"Mr. Darcy, wait for me," Miss Bingley called out even louder.
"Caroline, please," came Charles's voice.
"Oh, very well," said Miss Bingley, resigning herself.
Elizabeth could have sworn that there was something akin to pain in the woman's voice. Elizabeth was not sure she liked what she had witnessed. She was certain that what transpired was not at all proper. Would not the right thing for a gentleman to have done be to attend to the lady, however inconvenient it might prove? Not that she wanted to be drawn into whatever theatrical performance was unfolding between Mr. Darcy and the other woman. Even so, being the curious creature she was, Elizabeth could not help but wonder.
Chapter 2. Mr. Darcy kept to his apartment, pacing back and forth. He could not believe the audacity of that woman, the way she behaved in front of Elizabeth, the way she behaved. Period. Caroline Bingley's behaviour was beyond the pale, trying to hinder his departure from the breakfast room in such an egregious manner. The last thing Darcy wanted was for Elizabeth to get the wrong impression of the incident, to think that Caroline was an object of his affection, past or present. He was certain Elizabeth would think the worst if she got the wrong idea. She would think he was unfeeling and callous in his treatment of young ladies. He slumped into a chair and put his hands on his head. What if Elizabeth thinks I am a rake, a seducer of women? As it was, his conscience already weighed on him, and he felt no gentleman at all for having slept with another man's betrothed. But she had been in so much pain over her fate. To be trapped in such an arrangement, despite it being of one's own choosing, was one thing. In fact, it was not an unusual occurrence for people in his sphere to have arranged marriages for purposes having nothing to do with love or affection. To be young and sensuous and destined for a loveless marriage to a man who was impotent and incapable of fulfilling the promises of the union, its most important purpose of siring an heir, was an entirely different matter. A question that loomed heaviest in his mind was whether that one night of passion would be enough for the passionate young woman. The last thing he meant to do was put added pressure on Elizabeth. He would simply be there for her in any way she needed him. If she came to him, he would be there to welcome her with open arms. He would respect whatever boundaries she needed to ensure her own peace of mind if she did not. Darcy sprang from his chair and crossed the floor. After Miss Bingley's ruse, will Elizabeth even trust me enough to want to have anything to do with me, he wondered. This has the makings of a disaster, a total disaster. Darcy's fist struck the polished dark cherry-wooded post of his canopy bed. The pain caused by the blow crept up his arm. It eventually reached his heart, which was beating fiercely, making it difficult for him to achieve any composure. Darcy suspected that he had to make things right. In truth, he did not even have the opportunity to gauge Elizabeth's reaction before storming from the breakfast room. Perhaps Miss Bingley's little performance had escaped Elizabeth's notice altogether. Surely he could hope. Darcy glanced in the direction of the mirror and his heart skipped a beat when he saw Elizabeth's reflection. She stood by the doorway, her eyes fixed on him, her countenance noticeably altered. "Elizabeth, when did you get here?" Darcy asked, turning to face her. "I did not hear you come in."
"No, I am sure you did not."
Darcy could feel his face growing warm. He was not sure why, but he found her being there both comforting and alarming all at once. She looked lovely, radiant in her morning gown. Without thinking, he took her in his arms and hugged her tightly, almost too tightly.
Elizabeth hugged him back. Elizabeth felt the heat of his body and his grip tighten around her. She could not recall a time when she had felt more comforted. Elizabeth simply wanted to bask in the warmth of his embrace, but at the same time, her own fears were getting the better of her. She did not want to be angry with him. On the contrary, Elizabeth needed to know she could trust him. She did not want her memories of their night together to be tarnished by suspicion and doubt. By the same token, she needed to let him know that his behaviour towards Miss Bingley was disturbing. "Mr. Darcy," she finally spoke, freeing herself from his tight embrace. Elizabeth stepped away from him. "I think you and I need to talk."
"Does it concern what happened earlier in the breakfast room?"
"Sir, not that it is my place to ask."
"Elizabeth, after last night, there is nothing the two of us cannot talk about."
"Then tell me about Caroline Bingley. Specifically, what is she to you?"
"Nothing. She's nothing to me, other than my friend's sister."
Priding herself on her keenness, Elizabeth's senses began to stir. Her pulse was racing, her breath short and laboured. Her cheeks were flushed, and it was not due to anger. "I am afraid your response does not adequately address my question, especially having witnessed what unfolded between you."
"Then let me be specific. Despite Miss Bingley's unabashed attention, I've never given her any sign that I feel anything other than friendship for her."
Before Elizabeth could say more, Darcy took her in his arms again.
"Have I adequately addressed your question?" he asked, cupping her chin with his hand and looking into her eyes.
He did not wait for a reply. The moment his lips touched hers, everything disappeared. It was only the two of them, together, in their own little world. Her hand rested on his chest, connecting him to her. Elizabeth was sure he could hear the pounding of her heart, which was beating wildly. "I did not come here for this," she said in between kisses.
"I know," he whispered, "but since you did come, let us enjoy this moment."
"I have obligations I must attend."
"Did you see your sister?"
"I came here from Jane's apartment."
"Then what other obligations are there?"
"I have to return to Longbourn."
"Stay with me," he whispered, raising his lips from hers. Darcy pressed his forehead to Elizabeth's. "What am I doing?" Darcy found himself silently questioning. If the night before had taught him anything, it was that a man should never go so long without being with a woman he was in danger of losing control. As much as he wanted, even thirsted, for a repetition of their night of shared passion, he was not about to become a slave to his carnal desires. "I'm sorry," he said, letting her go and stepping back.
"Please do not be. It was my fault. I should not have come here like this."
"Not entirely. I took advantage of the moment. Please forgive me."
"What is there to forgive?"
Darcy took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. With each moment that passed, he knew his resolve to take things slower would weaken. The thought of tasting her lips again and feeling her body yield against his was achingly tempting. He turned his back to her. "You must never regret coming to me, Elizabeth. I am here for you. Always."
Darcy's voice was distant, his back to her. He appeared vulnerable, almost defenceless. Elizabeth wanted to hold him close, to comfort him. She knew she should leave, but something stronger kept her from doing so. Instead, she walked up behind him, wanting to touch him, daring herself not to touch him. She ached for him. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around Mr. Darcy's waist. He stood there, silent and still, torn. Elizabeth began to explore his body, touching him, lightly at first, then more daringly. She wanted to be close to him, to be his lover, his mistress. Nothing else mattered, not his past, his changeable moods, or anything. She could feel his body trembling.
"Elizabeth," he said, freeing himself from her embrace and turning to face her. "You have to go."
Chapter 3. An uneasy feeling accompanied Elizabeth every step of the way on her return to Longbourn. Deciding how she should behave around Mr. Darcy posed quite a conundrum, especially after what had transpired between them. They had shared a lingering parting kiss. Mr. Darcy had assured her his sending her away was not a repudiation of her on his part. He had held her in his arms the same way. He had kissed her lips the same way. She wanted to attribute her uncertainty to her own imagination, but other concerns were plaguing her. Elizabeth thought she had sorted out how she felt about Mr. Darcy during her early morning walk. As beautiful as their night together had been, it must never happen again. One look at him in the breakfast room melted every bit of her resolve. She had had a taste of what making love to Mr. Darcy was like, and she could not help wishing for more. That said, Elizabeth needed to make certain Mr. Darcy understood that her willingness to engage in such relations was contingent on mutual understanding. Neither ought to expect anything lasting from the other. Elizabeth had charted her path months ago. She had not decided she would marry William Collins, the heir to the only home she had ever known, owing to an entail to the family's male line, lightly. Having discovered Collins's secret did not bode well for her plans to marry him, give birth to a male heir, to break the entail, and then have as little as possible to do with its father. Part of her entertained the idea that she had been mistaken about what she thought she heard. Part of her embraced the idea that her plans for Longbourn still bore a chance of unfolding. Meeting a man like Mr. Darcy was not meant to change anything. Elizabeth placed her hand on her stomach. She knew enough about her own body to doubt her tryst would lead to unintended consequences. What was more, Mr. Darcy had exercised extraordinary measures to that end. Elizabeth would not regret what they had done, nor would she say it would never happen again. What would be the point? Her head was full of the gentleman and how it felt being in his arms. However, she would vow to be extra mindful of the timing of future assignations. The last thing she needed was to jeopardize her desire to keep her standing as the mistress of Longbourn. She owed it to herself, her family, and her beloved father's memory. Longbourn had always been and always would be their home to Elizabeth's way of thinking. Elizabeth climbed the steps to the front door, cracking it, hoping that her family and her intended Mr. Collins were nowhere around to know she had returned. She pushed it open as quietly as she could and slipped inside. As was her habit, she took a moment to look around the foyer, appreciating that all was as it ought to be. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hill, was adept at keeping things in order, allowing Elizabeth to spend copious time with Jane at Netherfield. Elizabeth headed up the stairs to her apartment, the same room she had shared with her sister Jane, despite her elevated standing as mistress of Longbourn by way of her marriage to her father's immediate successor, the late Mr. Tillman. She had not made it very far when she heard her mother calling. In mere moments she would have to face her mother, who would undoubtedly be especially excited once she learned of the arrival of an eligible man in their society. She had 3 younger daughters to get rid of. The business of her mother's life was marrying them off. This thought made her head ache. She paused for a moment and closed her eyes. Opening them, Elizabeth retraced her steps and went into the parlour where her mother, Mrs. Fanny Bennet, attended her sewing.
"My dear, dear girl, you are home," the former matriarch cried, pouring her eyes over her second eldest daughter before returning them to her sewing. "Did you enjoy your time with Jane?"
"Yes, Mamma."
"How is our dear Jane?"
"Jane is very well."
"Yes, I suppose she is. I pray we will receive exciting news in that quarter soon. Your sister is the mistress of Netherfield, but she must not rest on her laurels until she has given Mr. Bingley an heir."
Of course, Mrs. Bennet could have no way of knowing that her eldest was already with child. Jane had told no one other than Charles and Elizabeth. Elizabeth did not mean to break her sister's confidence. Mrs. Bennet tore her eyes from her task and peered at Elizabeth once more.
"Lizzie, you look tired. Did you sleep well? I am sure your room must have been very comfortable." She sighed. "If only Longbourn was half so nice as Netherfield. Not that I am one to complain, for Longbourn is far grander than Lucas Lodge, and thanks to your generosity, I shall always call Longbourn my home."
Elizabeth's mother had a way of boasting of her own good fortune while slighting her friends and neighbours. In this case, Mrs. Bennet disparaged the neighbouring estate, the home of her friends Sir William and Lady Lucas. Elizabeth's closest friend next to Jane also lived there with her parents, Miss Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte was 27 and still single, which gave Mrs. Bennet something to boast about, for 2 of her daughters had married already, and not one of Lady Lucas's had. Elizabeth swallowed. "I slept very well, thank you, Mamma," she replied with a slight smile, trying to be as pleasant as possible.
"I am glad to hear that everything was to your satisfaction." Then, resuming her former attitude, she asked, "Did you know Mr. Collins has been looking for you to return from Netherfield all morning?"
"I have no doubt," said Elizabeth, hoping she did not sound rude. "Pray, pardon me, Mamma. I was just on my way upstairs to my apartment to rest a while."
"Rest? Lizzie, are you ill?"
"No, Mamma, I assure you I am quite well."
"If you are not feeling poorly, then why are you going to your room to rest? This is not like you at all. You are usually the one who is the first to rise and the last to retire. Shall I send for Mr. Jones?"
The door swung open before Elizabeth could object, and Mr. Collins burst into the room, his spirits unusually high. She had never seen him in such a mood in all the time she had known him.
"Elizabeth, my dear," he said, bowing before her. "How kind of you to grace us with your lovely presence today. I was hoping that you and I could have a talk," he said, as soon as he caught his breath.
Elizabeth did not like to encourage him. Talking to him was the surest means of thwarting her purposes, but he was her betrothed. It was the least she could do, she often told herself. "Yes, Mr. Collins, I am rather tired after my walk, and I thought it would be best to rest. Perhaps you could say what you have to say to me later, perhaps after dinner." Mr. Collins' countenance collapsed, and he looked rather young and more vulnerable than Elizabeth had ever seen him. Elizabeth suffered a tinge of guilt over her dislike of him. Was this feeling due to her leaving Mr. Darcy's bed mere hours earlier, after she and Mr. Darcy had awakened in each other's arms? How was she to go on despising Mr. Collins now that she bore such a secret that would ruin her family's chances of staying at Longbourn, where she found out? Collins's own duplicity came to Elizabeth's mind, adding to her conundrum. She thought she had heard Mr. Collins speaking of his being impotent with his valet, but what if she had been mistaken in what she thought she had heard? What if he had said he was important, importuned? Had she behaved as she had because of a misunderstanding? How would she ever know with certainty before they were actually wedded? I might ask, she silently considered. But what would be his incentive to tell me the truth? Elizabeth inwardly sighed. Now she really was in danger of a headache. Might he have said omnipotent? It would have been just like him to utter such nonsense. Elizabeth silently scoffed. No, I am quite persuaded I heard him correctly. Mr. Collins is impotent.
I am certain what I have to say cannot wait, for it is good news, indeed, something that must surely elevate everyone's spirits, said Mr. Collins.
Good news? Asked Mrs. Bennet, who was getting a little impatient with the betrothed couple. She was hoping that her future son-in-law would say something about her second daughter and the gentleman's pending nuptials, no doubt.
Indeed, I have the pleasure of having received a letter from my former benefactor, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whom I previously informed of your good heart and the generosity of your nature, he said to Elizabeth.
I suppose that is a sort of consolation, said Elizabeth, covering her mouth to mask a sardonic smile. The tales she had heard from Mr. Collins regarding the noble lady from Kent confirmed he was the most ridiculous man she had ever met.
Yes, I am the recipient of her ladyship's benevolence once more, for she has bestowed her blessings onto our pending nuptials.
Elizabeth silently scoffed. I am sure your happiness is now complete, she said. Now, if you will excuse me—
If I might have the pleasure of more of your time, my dear, I have other news to impart. I am sure you will never guess what it is.
Elizabeth grew weary. Half smiling, she said, I am certain I will never guess. Perhaps you will end my suspense by simply telling me. Mr. Collins started bouncing on the balls of his feet like a schoolboy and smiling.
The Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and indeed the most benevolent person whom I have ever had the pleasure of knowing, also informed me that her esteemed relation, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy of Pemberley and Derbyshire, is to be a guest of Mr. Bingley and our own Mrs. Bingley. What a great honour this is for our family. He will be staying in Hertfordshire a month.
Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth cried, and immediately prayed that her manner of crying out the name of the gentleman whose very essence embraced every inch of her body, from her head to her toe, and everywhere in between, did not betray her. Mr. Collins nodded.
Indeed, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. Do you know Lady Catherine's dearest relative?
Elizabeth did not know what to say. Would confessing she knew Mr. Darcy not require some explanation of how she knew the gentleman, all the particulars of their introduction, and under what circumstance? Speaking falsehoods was not something Elizabeth was in the habit of doing. Even though future circumstances might compel her to do so repeatedly, she did not mean to start at that very moment. Denying she knew the man whose bed she had left mere hours earlier was something she would not do either. She could not. Instead, she nodded.
How is that possible? Mr. Collins scratched his head. Lady Catherine said Mr. Darcy would not be arriving before Wednesday.
I had the pleasure of speaking with him this morning at Netherfield. You will recall I had no choice but to spend the night at Jane's last evening, so that I might avoid being caught outside during a rainstorm. His countenance reflected his lingering confusion over Lady Catherine's intelligence.
Indeed, although I am certain the Bingleys would have made a carriage available to you had you insisted.
The last thing I wanted to do was inconvenience my sister and brother. So, no, I believe staying at Netherfield was the best thing I could do for everyone concerned. Elizabeth did not mean to make herself unhappy about what she had done. On the contrary, spending the night in Mr. Darcy's bed was a memory she would cherish for the rest of her life. Still, Mr. Collins' speech gave her something to think of. A month, she silently considered. Mr. Darcy will be here in Hertfordshire for a month. Elizabeth did not know whether that was a bad thing or a good thing. She leaned heavily toward the latter.
How fortunate you are to have enjoyed such a pleasure. Come, Elizabeth, you must tell me everything there is to know regarding your meeting Mr. Darcy. He brushed by Elizabeth, intending to sit on the sofa, and then paused. On second thought, I feel it is incumbent upon me to go to Netherfield Park straight away.
Elizabeth's heart slammed against her chest. But, sir, you must not intrude on the gentleman so soon after his arrival. He will surely think of it as impertinent.
Nonsense. It is not as though Mr. Darcy and I are wholly unacquainted, and as a former clergyman, I am obliged to repeat my condolences on the loss of his wife, the late Mrs. Anne Darcy, née de Bourgh, and welcome him to the neighbourhood. I suppose you ought to come with me.
Elizabeth could not hide her surprise. Mr. Darcy is a widower? The question reverberated in her thoughts over and over. A bevy of sentiments overtook her, a new awareness of the gentleman with whom she had suffered both agony and ecstasy.
Yes, I am afraid so. His late wife passed during her lying in. It was a most harrowing time for all concerned. Mr. Darcy was in agony. I have never heard of a man to suffer the loss of a wife so painfully as he did. No doubt, he simply did not want to face life without her. As Lady Catherine often asserted, the two of them were made for each other. Everyone who knew his late wife knew what an exceptional woman she was. She was a most charming young lady indeed. Lady Catherine, herself, always espoused that, in point of true beauty, her daughter was far superior to the most handsome of her sex, because there was that in her features which marked the young lady of distinguished birth.
Elizabeth was not immune to Mr. Collins's commendations on Mr. Darcy's deceased wife. She did not know how to look or feel as the drone of the other two voices in the room allowed a moment's reflection. It was not as though she had not entertained the idea of Mr. Darcy's being a widower. He hinted as much when we were together last night, did he not? However, Mr. Collins's accounting of the young woman's passing was oddly disquieting to Elizabeth, and not at all in keeping with Mr. Darcy's, albeit vague, innuendo. At length Elizabeth spoke. "As I have met Mr. Darcy already," she said, trying to drown out her own conflicting feelings, "I do not know that it is necessary that I call on Netherfield with you."
Very well. I shall go to Netherfield Park and express condolences on our behalf. However, I assure you, Elizabeth, I fully intend to extend Longbourn's hospitality to the gentleman by inviting him to dine here as soon as his schedule permits. I think I should make that my highest priority, for I am certain many of our neighbours are of a like mind. It would be a boon if one of my fair cousins attracted the gentleman's notice.
Elizabeth swallowed hard. Mrs. Bennet, as though suddenly realising the significance of this intelligence, said,
I always knew Jane's marriage would be the means of throwing her younger sisters in the paths of wealthy gentlemen. She set her sewing things aside and sprang to her feet. I shall gather Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, and see that they don their best frocks. We shall all go to Netherfield Park at once.
Mr. Collins nodded.
No doubt a man of Mr. Darcy's standing will be eager to find a new wife to give him an heir. He is blessed, in a peculiar way, with everything the heart of mortal can most desire: splendid property, noble kindred, and extensive patronage. Here, he paused and turned to Elizabeth. Although my cousins are silly and can hardly be worthy of such a fine man, we must all do our parts to promote a potential alliance between our families for good measure. What say you?
You've been enjoying After Last Night with Mr. Darcy, an extended excerpt written by P.O. Dixon and read by a multicast of professional human voice replicas. Thank you for listening. We truly hope you enjoyed it and will share your thoughts in the comments. Your continuing support makes all the difference in helping us bring more stories like this to YouTube. In addition to commenting, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. To our growing community of channel members, thank you for being here. Not yet a member? Join today for special perks, including minimal ads during the early listening period and much more.